I can't walk away from an objective perspective and say this man is a prophet of God. I can defend him as a Muslim. I can throw out these hadith and I can say, but Muhammad did it this in this context, and this happened in this context, and you can start defending him. You can take a defensive posture, that's fine. But as an objective investigator coming to the books of hadith and the books of seerah, the historical records of Islam, you do not walk away feeling like there's an objective case that Muhammad is a prophet of God. Far from it. You start seeing him as a product of the 7th century, a natural product of the 7th century.
I looked at God and I said, God, if I do this though, I have to give up my family. Matthew chapter 10's next verses, you want to know what they are? He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. As I read that, I said, God, it's not just my parents though. It's my whole life. The next verses say, he who is not willing to pick up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Yeah, God knows the cost. The cost that Muslims have to pay today, the cost that you might have to pay if you're listening to this, is not a new cost. It's the cost the disciples had to pay from the very beginning. It's the cost we all must be ready to pay if we're going to follow Jesus.
You can ask Muslims yourself. I would encourage you to understand that generally speaking, as people learn their religion, whether they're Muslim, Christian, what have you, people generally learn from their teachers. So they learn what their teachers have taught them. And generally speaking, most teachers are not going to go to the problematic hadith, pull them out, and talk about them to their Muslim congregation. So no, most Muslims do not know about Sahih al-Bukhari, book 61. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he's the first one Muhammad mentioned. You look at the records of what Abdullah ibn Mas'ud had in his Quran, he had 111 chapters of the Quran. Well, what does today's Quran have? 114. There's 3 chapters in today's Quran that were not included in the number one teacher Muhammad picked. What does Abdullah ibn Mas'ud say about those 3 chapters? He says these are hadith Qudsi. These are revelations, sure, but they're not Quran. These are just prayers. What about the other guy, Ubay ibn Ka'b? What does he say? He says, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, you're wrong, and Uthman's Quran is wrong. It's 116 chapters. There's 2 more that should belong in here. These are the most trusted men with the teaching of the Quran, and they disagree with today's version of the Quran. The historical record points to this. The early Islamic records point to this. There's a lot more, by the way.
And it took a long time. This wasn't an overnight event. But after about a year, I came to the conclusion, all right, the New Testament manuscripts are reliable. I didn't believe in the gospel or anything like that. It was just the New Testament manuscripts. It took me a year. But I realized the way that the New Testament manuscripts proliferated, the way they were written down and sent throughout the early church, there was no one who's able to control these manuscripts and edit them in such a way that a change would not be detected. Simply no way to do that. So after about a year, I came to the conclusion that there is no way for the New Testament to have been uniformly and undetectably altered. Not possible.
The Muslim culture is built hugely on hospitality. You get to know some Muslims and you will see that hospitality is major thing to them, as it should be to everyone. We are missing out on that here. I don't know why. Is it fear, do we think? We shouldn't be afraid of anything. 2 Timothy chapter 1 tells us that we've not been given a spirit of fear, but of power. But let alone of sharing the gospel. I mean, at most they're going to say they don't like us. What, are we so worried about our feelings that we're willing to withhold salvation? So just start talking and just start sharing your life. And in the context of that, opportunities will come up for faith. And if you don't know the answer to every question, that's fine. Just wait and look it up and read together, work through these things together like David and I did.
That's great.
Chapter 9 of the Quran is the last major chapter of the Quran to have been composed, and it is the most expansively violent. This is the one that starts off by saying this is a disavowal of all the treaties we have with polytheists. Chapter 9, verse 5, slay the infidels wherever you find them, lay siege to them, take them captive. Chapter 9, verse 29, fight the Jews and Christians until they pay you the poll tax and they feel subdued. Why? Chapter 9, verse 33, Islam has been made to prevail over every religion. So, chapter 9 is the most violent. It's the culmination of the Islamic message. It's the marching orders that Muhammad leaves Muslims with, which is why when he dies, Muslims conquer 1/3 of the known world within 150 years.
Right.
These were the
By the
messages.
sword.
It's complex. Once again, they would tell places, if you do not convert, then you have the option to pay a tax, and if you don't pay that tax, then we will fight you.
The jizya.
Exactly. When I was a Muslim, I used to challenge Christians by saying things like, the word Trinity is not found anywhere in the Bible. I'd say things like the doctrine of the Trinity developed over hundreds of years. But the reason why that felt strong to me was because I was not consistent in my criticism. If I applied the same critical thoughts to Tawheed, here's what I would have found. The word Tawheed is not found in the Quran. In fact, it's not found anywhere in the Hadith. The concept of Tawheed was continuing to be developed for hundreds of years after Muhammad. That's why it wasn't found in Hadith. And in fact, Tawheed is complex both philosophically and theologically. Initially, when I encountered the violence in Islam, I said, well, this can't be the true Islam. And I, for years, would push back, arguing, no, this hadith here is unreliable. For example, Muhammad says in Sahih Muslim that he has come to expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and will not leave any but Muslims. That doesn't sound like the Muhammad I knew, so I said, well, that can't be a reliable tradition. And then another tradition from Sahih Bukhari, which says, I have been ordered to fight people until they testify that there is no God but Allah, and only then will their lives and their property be saved from me. And this is from the most reliable collection of hadith, Sahih Bukhari. And so I said, no, that can't be reliable either. And as you continue, you find Muhammad beheading multiple hundreds of men at the same time. You see him distributing those men's wives and children into slavery. You see him torturing people for money. You see him, all these atrocities within Muhammad's life, and not always in defensive battles by any means, offensively as well.
Can you, think about this. As a Muslim, my whole life, I believe that God sat on his throne and he would never enter into this world, and he ruled us from above, and he gave us a bunch of things to do, and he would judge us at the end of time. But this story is that God was willing to enter into this world, in a filthy world. And he was willing to live as a carpenter, blue-collar laborer, and he's willing to live with people who would ultimately betray him. And then he's willing to go to a cross and suffer and die for the sake of sinners. Our God, who created the universe, all the stars in the sky, he just thought them into existence. That God is willing to die. And as he tells us that he loves us so much, he's willing to die for us, this is what he says. As I have loved you, so love one another.
So what I am is a human being, that's my being. Who I am is Nabeel, that's my person. The two are not the same thing. All of us in here share essentially the same type of being that we are. We are human beings, but none of you share essentially the same kind of person that I am. We're all different persons. So the characteristic of a being is very different from that of a person. I am one being with one person. God is one being with three persons: Father, Son, and Spirit. Is there anything like that on this earth? No. But does that mean God cannot be one being in three persons? Absolutely. It means he can be that if that's what he is. There's no way we can know these deeper things about God apart from revelation.
It didn't take me long to get to Matthew chapter 5, where it says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." And when I saw those words, it was like electric on the page, and it jumped off the page and started my heart. That's what it felt like. Kill me. I heard these words, because this is not about you. In that moment, my life, my theology, my everything was just rebooted. And I stood up from there, and I walked outside. By the way, I had been crying all night, so this is the next morning. I walk outside, and I know this sounds cliche, but it's true. Everything looked different. Everything looked different. It was the same apartment, the same tree, the same street, but it all looked different. And the one thing that looked the most different was when I saw someone walking across the street. Now, I'd seen that millions of times before, but for the first time, I realized that's not just someone, that's someone that God was willing to die for. When people say Islam is a religion of peace, I think the best that they can mean is that there are Muslims who honestly follow Islam, who honestly believe it is a peaceful religion. But when you take a look at what Islam is historically, if you define Islam as that religious system which the Muhammad in the pages of history left behind, there's no question that it's violence. So, to be a little bit more clear, when you take a look at the Quran, you will see certain passages like Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 256, which says, La ikraha fid din, there is no compulsion in religion. And Muslims will quote this and they will say, look, it says there's no compulsion in religion. Obviously it's peaceful. But the Quran also has verses, like in chapter 9, verse 5, slay the infidel wherever you find them. Lay siege to them and take them captive. Chapter 9, verse 29 says, fight the Jews and Christians until they pay the tax and feel humiliated. Chapter 9, verse 111 says, Allah has bought your life and your property for this, that you may slay in battle and be slain. And so a Muslim has to think about maybe giving up his social life for sure, and maybe even destroying his family's social life, and then maybe even giving up your life itself because of the law of apostasy. And then if you're wrong about all this, the Quran says you're going to hell. So at this point, I fell to my knees and started asking God in the daily prayers, outside of the daily prayers. I'm asking God, God, I need you to reveal yourself to me. I have looked and it looks like Islam is not true. Please forgive me for saying that. And it looks like Christianity might be true. Please forgive me for saying that. Can you tell me who you are?